Hi everyone, welcome to Tower of Knowledge. Today we are going to discuss about CRR, that means cash reserve ratio, and SLR. SLR means statutory liquidity ratio. So in this video, I would like to give a clear-cut difference between CRR and SLR. Let's move on the topic. So here we have to understand the credit creation. So for giving a limit to credit creation, RBI using some tools. Now we only discuss the reserves. The first one is the cash reserve ratio. The second one is the statutory liquidity ratio. So central bank is always telling every commercial bank has to keep a certain percentage of deposit as a reserve. So the reserves is also part of assets, that you have to remember. The reserves also part of assets. Every bank has to keep, every bank must keep as reserve as a certain percentage of deposits. Okay, this is called a reserve. In the case of cash reserve ratio, the bank has to keep the certain percent deposit as cash. That is called a cash reserve ratio. The percentage is determined by central bank. Why? For limit the credit creation, and the second purpose is that to ensure that no bank is over lending, to avoid over lending. Okay, and next is that it is a legal requirement, and every bank is binding on the RBI's guidelines. So every bank should do that. This is called a required reserve ratio or cash reserve ratio. So this is a reserve. The primary purpose, the reserve means the certain percentage of deposit which every bank must keep as reserve. That is a reserve. Okay. So there are two types of reserve, that is cash reserve ratio and statutory liquidity ratio. In the case of cash reserve ratio, the bank has to keep certain percentage of deposit as a cash. Okay, as a cash. That is called a cash reserve ratio. And why RBI is giving, or why RBI is imposing such kind of guidelines to banks? That is, this is done to ensure that no bank is overlending, and also to limit the credit creation. These are the functions for these tools. Next is the statutory liquidity ratio. Statutory liquidity ratio means what? That is SLR. Statutory liquidity ratio. Apart from CRR, we know already, we discussed CRR. Banks are also required to keep some reserves in liquid form in short term. That means banks can keep some amount as a liquid form. That means it is in through gold or cash or any government security. Bank can keep it is in the form of gold, in the form of cash, or in the form of government security. There is no demand that it should be in cash. That is cash reserve ratio. But in the case of SLR, it is in liquid form. That means we can have to convert into cash. That's called a liquid form. So the statutory liquidity ratio, popularly called SLR, that is statutory liquidity ratio, is the minimum percentage of deposits that the commercial bank maintains through gold, cash, and other securities. That is called the statutory liquidity ratio. In the case of CRR, that is the government, or sorry, every commercial bank has to keep certain percentage of deposits as cash. Okay, but in the case of statutory liquidity ratio, the minimum percent deposit that the commercial bank maintains through gold or cash or other government securities. Okay, in CRR, the cash reserves is maintained by the banks with the Reserve Bank of India. So here, the amount has to keep in Reserve Bank of India. But in the case of SLR, the deposits are maintained by the banks themselves. They can keep in bank itself. Okay, and also not whether the RBI or Reserve Bank of India, and the statutory requirement of the reserve ratio act as a limit to amount of credit and that banks can create. So this is another tool to limit the credit creation. So this is the primary function of CRR and SLR. And next we can understand what is the main difference between SLR and CRR. Always we know the certain percentage amount has to keep every bank as a reserve. Already we know that. But what is the difference between? How can we clarify the two terms? Let's move on that. This is CRR and this is SLR. Look at here, this is CRR means cash reserve ratio, SLR means statutory liquid ratio. The CRR requires banks to have only cash reserves with the RBI. CRR means, that is the name itself indicate that the only cash reserves with the RBI. But in the case of SLR, banks are asked to have reserves of liquid assets. We can store, the bank can reserve, reserve liquid assets like cash, gold and other government securities. Most probably bank always selecting government securities. Okay, that is a sovereign bond. Also that's why always bank is preferred to SLR in government security. Okay, then second statement is that bank don't earn returns on money parked at CRR. That means there is no interest payment. In the case of CRR, there is no interest payment, but in the case of SLR, bank is getting interest payment or returns. That is, you have to remember. Next is that the central bank controls the liquidity in the banking system with the CRR. The central bank controls the liquidity. The liquidity means money supply in the banking system with the CRR. Okay, if you increase in the whether it increase or whether it decrease, depending on that, the central bank controls the money supply. Next is that SLR is used to control the bank's leverage for credit expansion. So it's also a tool to limit the credit expansion. This is the main difference. This is same, but the first and second, there is a difference between CRR. CRR is only in cash, but SLR is a liquid form assets like cash, gold, or government security, and the bank banks don't get any returns on CRR, but in the case of SLR, bank will get interest payments, and these are two using for to limit the credit creation. But fourth difference is that in CRR, the cash reserve is maintained by the banks with the Reserve Bank of India. The CRR, in the case of CRR, the cash reserve is maintained by the banks with the Reserve Bank of India. Every commercial bank have to keep the CRR in Reserve Bank of India. But in the case of SLR, the securities are kept with the banks themselves. There is no need to keep the SLR in RBI. So the bank can keep themselves, okay, which they need to maintain in form of liquid assets. There is only conditions that it is in the form of liquid assets. So these are the main difference between CRR and SLR. I hope everyone has understood this concept very thoroughly. Thank you all. Thank you for watching.